More than half of the world's population now lives in urban areas. That is, more than 4 billion people living in cities. In the history of human civilization, this is a rather recent phenomenon. This rapid shift over the last century has posed increased challenges in maintaining a good quality of life for the inhabitants. The housing needs, effective transportation, employment opportunities, proper and proportionate use of land to facilitate all of these, all the while being environmentally conscious. All of this takes a rigorous and conscious efforts to build a city that is thriving and is sustainable. This art and science of designing and organizing the physical, social, and economic aspects of urban areas is called urban planning. Today, we will learn about professionals who carefully study and diligently understand the needs of the community to constantly improve our cities and the communities that inhabit them. Urban planners. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. My guest today is Preeti Shankar, an urban planner and managing director of Urban Analytics team at the Center for Neighborhood Technology, a Chicago-based nonprofit working at the intersection of the built environment and equity. She has managed the development of several web-based decision-making tools that promote equitable outcomes. Her recent work includes collaborations with community-based organizations, governmental agencies, and other research organizations to support community-led data analysis and research on transit, air quality, and water issues. Preeti holds a Master of Urban Planning from Texas A&M University and a Bachelor of Architecture from Visvesvaraya Technology University, India. Today, Preeti will share with us her journey as an urban planner and how data and analytics is becoming an integral part of urban planning. Hi, Preeti. Welcome to Career Calling.
Thank you, Pratibha. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, it's amazing. We all enjoy a good life offered to us in our cities, but often being very oblivious to what it takes to run an efficient city. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today. To start with, can you give me an overview of what are some of the core pillars of urban planning? I know it's broad, it takes a lot of things to run a city efficiently, but what are some of the core pillars of urban planning that goes on?
Sure. So urban planning or city planning, as it sometimes can also be known, includes many aspects of the built and natural environment that we encounter every day. So that includes making and implementing plans on the systems that we use, like our public transportation systems, the roads that we use, the buildings that we inhabit in, the water system, and the natural areas that we access, to name a few. So as such, planners are people who work on creating these and implementing these plans, and they act as an intermediary between residents and the city or any other jurisdiction that they work for. So they speak to residents about how residents envision the future of their city to be, or how they want to use and encounter spaces in their city, bring all that information, analyze it, and then create short and long-term plans for the city or the jurisdiction that they're working for.
That's great. Now, are these always government bodies like the counties that are involved in urban planning, or what are the other organizations typically?
Most typically, I'd say the name city planning gives you a clue. A lot of planning happens at the city level. There are several units of government that are involved. So there are county governments. There are agencies called regional planning organization. Then there's the state and federal governments that also are involved in planning. And then within each department, within each of these government agencies, there are several departments. So there could be a transportation department, there could be an environment department, an economic development department, who are all working on planning, but just coming at it from different areas, because we live in a city where all these issues intersect. And in addition to that, there are organizations such as civic, nonprofit organization, consultants who help cities in creating plans.
Coming to your specific area of analytics, like in the business world, we all know the value of data and analytics. Everything has become data driven. So it's very interesting, the use of data in urban planning. Can you touch upon a little bit what are the areas where the data is utilized and how?
Absolutely. So data it just helps us understand things better, right? So data and analytics play a really big role in understanding the existing conditions in a city. So things like where do people live? Where do they go? How do they access jobs? So where are the jobs? Where are the grocery stores they get to? Where are the hospitals? So just understanding that spatial relationship between how you live your daily life, right? And also looking at those connections. How do you get to those places helps us understand availability of access or the lack of access, let's say. When we use data, we're able to create tools, maps, visualizations in understanding how people use these services. And then we can provide this information to elected officials who can make informed decisions.
Is the data also used in terms of how the residential areas are planned? Can you give some examples of how it impacts how the city?
Sure, absolutely. So, cities have been around for a long time, but typically they are driven by zoning. And you are allowed to have residential uses in certain areas. They're usually not adjacent to industrial areas. There are anomalies, of course. Then there are these employment centers. So they're all planned in such a way in the US that typically there isn't too many opportunities for mixed uses, although that is changing in cities. But that is understanding where these uses are helps us then plan for access to, let's say, food. You might have heard the term food deserts. That comes from understanding where people live, where grocery stores are, and where is there a gap in that access, right? Because not everybody has access to a grocery store. So it helps us in planning not just locations of where people live, where jobs are, but also understand where there is that lack of access. So yeah, data gets used for various reasons like that. And then there is another layer of the data, which typically when we say data, we think quantitatively, but there's a qualitative lived experience in the community, right? So we reach out to our residents to say, data of course says this, what does your lived experience say? You might have a bus stop, but that bus stop, there are challenges for you to get to that bus stop. The sidewalk is broken, or there's crime in your neighborhood that makes you feel unsafe to walk to a bus stop. So those things don't typically show up in quantitative data, which is why we rely on qualitative data to fill in those gaps. And that can be done through interviews, through surveys, reaching out to your community and having focus group meetings with them just to understand their experiences better.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That was going to be my question is how do you gather data? What types of data and how do you gather data? Because it is pretty widespread, right?
Correct.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to think of data as quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative data is anything attached with a number. You can put in some sort of an Excel document. It's a spreadsheet. Calculations can happen through it. You can spatially visualize things. So that would be quantitative data. And in the US, we're very fortunate to get a lot of data at a granular level, which is called the census block group, which you can equate to a few city blocks. So you can think of maybe 6 city blocks in an average city. That's about the census block group. And you can get information on socioeconomic conditions within that. So the population count, how many people live there, what race ethnicities there are, what income levels they make, and a lot of information about your buildings itself. How old are the buildings, how many structures. So that helps us then think about issues in terms of density, people living there, the age of structures, and think of the multitude of factors that influence plan. And a lot of that data comes from the federal level, from the US Census Bureau. And then that typically becomes the basis of a lot of the spatial analysis or quantitative analysis that we do. And then we overlay that with additional relevant information. So let's say in Chicago, if I'm trying to understand where flooding happens, every time it rains, there are certain neighborhoods that flood. And if I were to understand that, I would pull in data from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. So they have data on where flooding claims are played out. So I can then overlay that information and say, in Chicago, do some neighborhoods flood more than others? And then I can do another deeper level of search there saying, okay, sure, there is some disparity. Neighborhoods in Chicago because Chicago has historically been a segregated city. The south and west sides tend to have a lot of inequities. So when we focus in on flooding is occurring more over there, then you can go into it one level deeper and then say who lives there. And then you often find that certain races and ethnicities and income levels, typically people of color, making lower incomes, tend to be impacted by these issues more than others. So then another layer of data comes in from federal level, but a lot of the information is made available through data portals at the federal level. And then there's varying level of data available from state and local agencies themselves. So that's on the quantitative piece. The qualitative piece is where we reach out to community groups who tend to work at a grassroots level, have a really good understanding on the issues impacting their communities. We work with them on understanding the impact of certain issues in those communities. And they're a great conduit in collecting data. And that's through them, because they have established relationships with community residents. We reach out to them and then get more lived experiential data. So that's talking to them, presenting the information that we have and getting them to ground, which is verifying that what the data says on a map is actually what the lived experience in the community is. So that can be done through community meetings, that can be done through focus groups, interviews, surveys, and that information, again, it helps us then inform the planning process.
How common is having this data and analytics roles within the city? Is it very common, or is it only few cities that you see in US?
I would say more and more cities are focusing on data. Everybody has a GIS department, or a geographic information system department, where the spatial data is available. I think what a lot of cities don't typically do is the analytical exploration of issues. And that typically, I want to say, comes from the outside, some resistance and push from external organizations such as mine, nonprofits that want to work with the city on getting towards that future that we all envision. But sometimes you need an external push for things to happen. That's why more often there are consultants and organizations like mine who play that advocate's role. And consultants, of course, help the city and do some of this work. More and more cities are focusing on it, but typically it tends to be more the consultants or nonprofit world that leads this sort of work.
So you work at Center for Neighborhood Technology. So that is a consulting firm then?
It's a nonprofit consulting firm. We do a lot of things. So consulting is one of the things we do. So we work with the city and county governments in Chicago and Cook County and nationwide. And we like to say we act as a bridge between community groups and the city. But we are also very tapped into the community-based organization in Chicago, because we truly feel they are the ones who can identify issues and solutions in the community, right? They face these issues. They also have a good understanding of what they need. So instead of working backwards and going to them and saying, this is what we think we need, we like to take the approach of these are the issues impacting a community. And then we have them identify issues, and then we bring in our expertise of data and analytics to give it a little more support in terms of quantitative data and then reach back out to the city. In that sense, we play a few different roles. We are consultants, we are advocates, we are your local research organization as well.
Coming to your education, you did your undergrad in architecture and then master's in urban planning. Given this is like emerging field on urban planning and analytics, how did you get into this field? How did you come across this as a career path?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there was some fascination with architecture when I was younger. It just felt like a really creative pursuit. And I didn't really have a clear plan, but that's where I landed up. It sounded exciting. I wanted to do it. And I went through the 5 years of architecture course. At the end of it, unfortunately, I realized that maybe focusing on one building, looking inward in the architectural sense, wasn't for me. And then I had a planning studio as part of my curriculum, which then gave me experience working on a real world issue. So it was reconfiguring traffic in an old part of Bangalore city. That really instigated this interest in planning and thinking about, like I said, going beyond that one building you're designing and looking outward. So some work on that was very exciting for me. And at that point, I had practiced or worked with an architect for a year, and I realized I wanted to explore the planning world some more. So I came to the US to get a master's degree in that. So that's when I said, okay, I needed to understand this more, and then got into urban planning. I focused on transportation planning. So within urban planning, you can pick a focus area or you can focus on general planning. And I focused on transportation planning, which is so tied into cities. It felt it had more of a spatial angle, which kind of coming from architecture, I appreciate it. And so that's how I got into it and got a degree master in urban planning with specialization in transportation planning. And I coincidentally ended up in the analytical world because I really loved the work Center for Neighborhood Technology was doing. And I applied for a job there, got into it, and then begun understanding the true beauty in using data and analytics in the urban planning world, which went beyond what I trained for in college.
So you acquired all your data skills on job?
I would say so. I did learn one software called Geographic Information Systems, GIS, which typically helped me enter into the planning field and get started. I, of course, knew some skills like Microsoft Excel, which also come in handy, surprisingly, when you work on data analysis. And then a lot of what I learned has been on the job, honing in my skills on using the tools that I know, learning from co-workers. And I think what I really learned well is using the knowledge and the tools I have in a more effective way to answer some real world questions. In some ways, this has been a happy accident, and a lot of the learning I've had has been on the job.
Coming from a foreign country to be part of what is generally more of the federal or a government body, what is that like? Are there opportunities that is common?
So I'd say jobs are common in the planning field, but the challenge of being a foreigner is one, you're learning a new system, right? In terms of even just terminology used, you could say roads, you could say streets, you could say so many different things. So at a very fundamental level, there's adjustment and learning that happens. And then just inhabiting a new country and experiencing those spaces, in some ways, you're behind on learning the impact of those systems on people. So there's also a beautiful opportunity in learning it as an adult than imbibing it as a child. So there's like an option to question and observe as an adult, which I appreciate. I've come to realize that's been one of the things that has helped me through my professional career. In terms of jobs, there are plenty, but there are, of course, the realities of getting a work permit, which can be hard. And unlike other fields where, people working on work permits is more typical, I'd say that it's less typical in the planning field. So that continues to be a hurdle. Once you make your way past that, I think just learning constantly on the job is a given because, like I said, there's some things that are new to you. Also in my role in the data and analytics field, I'm not focusing on one issue. Like I'm not only looking at transportation. So I've spent 10 years, I understand that better, but then you have to base subject matter expertise on new issues, right? As they come up, as your city is facing like scooters came in. If you have those things, you have to understand the impact of that on planning. Where do they park? How do they use the sidewalk infrastructure? So there's constant learning. So I'd say, that it's been a very fruitful process in that sense. But there are, of course, these hurdles of getting a job and then finding a way to work there.
When it comes to, as an employer, you may be hiring a lot of new students, like fresh graduate students, right? What are some of the skills that you're looking for, and how does college major impact how much of an importance it is, and what are the skill sets that becomes important?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel a training in urban planning or environmental policy, public policy, environmental sphere is important to help you understand how these systems interact with each other. So college gives you a good foundation base to understand that. So in that sense, that would be a great start, building your knowledge from there. And in terms of looking for new hires, what I would look for is a background in urban planning or an adjacent field so that they understand the field to some extent. And if they've had some experience through internships or volunteering at these community-based organizations that I mentioned before, that's a big plus. In terms of technical skills, I'd say in my team, because we're focused on data and analytics, beginner level understanding of GIS and using that is important. Any other spatial and visualization tools like Power BI, Tableau, there are several, those are great as well. And statistical software comes in handy too. So if we know R, that would be great as well. And we're doing a lot of coding. Coding languages like Python are always desired. But the willingness to learn on the job will overcome a lot of the lack of technical skills. And everything that we do has to be presented orally and in a written format. So great communication skills are important because we put all this analysis into some form that is then informs decision making by the intended audience. So an ability to translate the analytical work into an effective communication piece is important.
Great. You touched upon it a little bit, but I just wanted to double click on from education to workforce, that transfer. What are some of the ways people can enhance their chances? You talked about internship. So can you touch a little on what are the ways they can familiarize themselves?
Sure, absolutely. So I'd say a lot of, when you're at the college level, there are a lot of these profession groups at the student level itself. So there are student planning organizations when I'm talking about urban planning specifically. Or there's the American Planning Organization, which are more professional bodies that allow you to get an experience and understanding and be in the same spaces as people working in the urban planning field. Young professional groups are also a great opportunity to kind of network and understand the field better. And I'd say an internship when you're in school is a great opportunity. I feel like you should try out working at a few different organizations to see how working styles differ and areas of interest, depending on what, if you're unsure of what you want to do, just test out a couple of different things and see what kind of resonates with you. Internship, I feel, are really key. I would also urge people to not feel shy about approaching people in the urban planning field itself for informational interviews. And to understand what does this work look like on a day-to-day basis and how can they prepare to then get a similar job if that's what they're interested in. And if not an internship, just spending time volunteering with planning organizations, with organizations involved in the planning field is also a good way to understand the workings or how to communicate with the public. So there are several opportunities and you can test out the field before you actually finish your degree.
Let's talk about the career path. You have had a tremendous growth. Tell us about a little bit on what are the different career paths that are possible and what does growth look like?
Sure. So there are several different paths you can take. So you can definitely go to the nonprofit world like I am in. And there is the government agencies that you could work for, right? So there are city, county, multiple levels of government agencies that you could work in. Or then there are these for-profit consulting firms. So depending on your interest, you could align in one of those. But typically about an 8 to 10 year experience is when you begin managing teams. So then you progress to planner, depending on what your organization calls it, like a senior planner, and then you can go up to the management level. And you can also start in one sector and move to another. So I've seen a lot of people who start at, let's say, a city government or even a non-profit, and then they progress to different decision-making bodies. So some move up to state and federal levels because at the higher level, that's where a lot of the most impactful decisions are being made. So I'd really say it depends on you and your preferred career path. But typically in about 8 to 10 years, you tend to move into a more managerial role and begin to manage teams if that's where your interests.
Is it possible for, say, you have been part of the Chicago city for long? Can people move to different US cities? And that's common, right? The underlying skill set remains the same.
Absolutely, yeah. Underlying skills remains the same. I think as with any job, when you move to a new job, you'd have to understand the landscape in that job better. So in this case, it's another city or another jurisdiction. But absolutely, skills are transferable. You can definitely apply the skills that you have learned in another physical location.
Another thing I wanted to ask, is the city planning or urban planning just a common term used for counties, or is there something different for rural planning, for example?
No, we tend to say, yeah, so that's just planning, I think would be the more inclusive word. Then signals, it's more for cities, but this happens at every level, right? Plans have to be made for any geography. So even rural areas have their plans. They're probably called the same terminology, long-term, short-term plans. The body that creates the plans can vary. So like Chicago has the city of Chicago, has Cook County, but let's say you're in a rural area, you probably don't belong to a city, right? Then it's your county level planning that impacts you. But yeah, every region, every kind of environment, urban, rural, suburban has planning, or urban planning is just a commentary as well.
Commentary. And is it important then to understand the government rules, policies as part of your job?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't have direct touch with policy, or I'm not strategizing on how policies can be made, but all the data and analytics are driven to serve policy. So an understanding of policy is important, and understanding of what data would be needed to advance policy is important. And just being able to interpret the impact of policy changes on people and how that could be studied through data is very important. So I'd say, yeah, policy is completely important. Although you're not dealing with language, policy, ordinance, that kind of a thing, it impacts even the data and analysis that you do.
Is there something that you taught in college as one of the course, or is mostly on job?
You could take some policy related classes in undergrad and at school, but a lot of it depends on the context you're working in, right? So if I'm in the city of Chicago, the policies that the city makes would be relevant to me. But if I was in a suburban area, that varies. So I'd say that's something you would have to find your own job.
Now, there is a lot of changes that are happening that are heavily impacting some of the industries. For example, technology industry, there is this whole AI and all of this advancements. It's uncertain 10 years later where things will be. When it comes to planning jobs, what is your take, like somebody who is starting today? What are some of the things you would advise they focus on? Do you see in terms of approach to planning their career? Is there any advice you would give them?
I'd say innovation happens at the city constantly, right? It could be in terms of using new technology for your speed cameras or your air quality monitors. There is a lot of innovation that happens at the city level. So it's important to understand the impact of all those technologies on how a city can function and the impact of that on people. Although it seems like more of a tech focused discussion, when you talk about AI, those things can trickle down to how a city functions. So keeping an eye on those kinds of things and understanding how that can impact city systems is important. Typically, those decisions are made more at the city level. Like I wouldn't have the ability to make decisions on what technology a city uses. But what I can do is community science is a kind of like an emerging field where community residents are involved in collecting, gathering, maintaining some of the data themselves. I mentioned the air quality monitors before. You as a citizen or a resident could install an air quality monitor outside your house and measure the quality of air. And that plugs into this system that anybody can have access to. These things come into play at the urban planning or city level as well. And as an average resident or even a planner, there are several ways you come across it in your work.
And finally, Preeti, are there any resources you would recommend for the younger students who are planning to learn about this? What are some of the resources that has been helpful for you?
Yeah, I'd say a really good book that I recommend anybody who's interested in urban planning to read is this book called The Depth and Lights of Great American Cities. It's by an author called Jane Jacobs, who was an activist, a pioneer, and really well-known person in the urban planning field. Just even if you're not pursuing that as a career option, I'd say that's a good book. For students who are interested in learning more about the planning field, the American Planning Association has a great website, which can be a good resource to learn more. There's another website called Planetizen. It collates recent information about planning field plans from cities. Those are some good options to learn more about the field. And YouTube can be a wonderful resource as well. You can find a lot of things on YouTube. and some class materials explaining kind of the basics of planning, what's involved in that. And those would be good places to start.
That's great. Thank you so much, Preeti. This was very helpful. And thank you for taking out time and joining my podcast today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I hope I've inspired some future urban planners.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. This is Career Calling, and I'm your host, Pratibha Pandit. Thank you for tuning in.